"Leave," he said. His voice was barely a sound, more like gravel scraping against itself. "You don't want to be here when they come back." Emily Carter looked at the man on the ground. Hands bound, blood on his face, a Hell's Angels patch on his chest. And she made the worst, or maybe the best decision of her life. She stayed. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Emily's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The highway had a sound at 4 a.m. that most people never hear. Not silence, never silence. It was something more specific than that, a low, hollow hum that came up through the asphalt and lived in the soles of your feet if you stood still long enough. Emily Carter had stood still on enough highways, in enough states, over the past 14 months to know that sound the way other people knew the sound of their own refrigerators, their own heating units, the familiar creak of a house settling into night. She knew it the way she knew hunger, which was completely, and the way she knew shame, which was constantly, and the way she knew loneliness, which was like knowing the weather always present, always changing shape, never actually leaving. Arizona in late October was cold in a way that surprised people who had never been there. They thought desert, they thought heat, they thought sand baking under a merciless sun. They didn't think about the way the cold could come down off the mountains after dark and cut straight through a secondhand jacket that was already one hard winter away from being useless. Emily pulled the jacket tighter and kept walking the shoulder of Route 89, her backpack riding low on her shoulders, her eyes moving the way they always moved, systematically, efficiently, quartering the roadside the way a search team would. Except she wasn't looking for a missing person. She was looking for anything she could sell. 14 months on the road taught her things that no guidebook covered. That rest stops had better pickings than highway shoulders. But highway shoulders were safer at night because they were open and you could see trouble coming. That aluminum cans were worth more per hour of effort in states with bottle deposit laws, which Arizona didn't have, but copper wire was universal. That the stretch of road between mile markers 47 and 52 on this particular highway had a history of being used as a dumping ground for people too lazy to drive to the actual county landfill, which meant that if you were willing to sort through other people's refuse in the dark, you occasionally found something worth something. She had found $8.40 in scattered coins over the last 3 hours. A phone charger with a frayed end that she might be able to repair, half a bottle of hand sanitizer, a fleece blanket that smelled like motor oil but was structurally intact. She was not proud of any of this. She had stopped being proud of things approximately 11 months ago when she realized that pride was a luxury that operated on a different budget than the one she was working with. The rule, her rule, the one she had constructed carefully out of hard experience, was simple. Never stop for strangers. Don't make eye contact with anyone you don't know in the dark. Don't let sympathy override judgment. Sympathy was expensive. Judgment was survival. She had built that rule out of specific memories she didn't let herself revisit too often, because revisiting them didn't help anything and only made it harder to sleep. The point was the rule. The rule worked. The rule had kept her safe through 14 months of situations that she would not have predicted surviving when she was the kind of person who had a home and a job and a future that looked like something more than the next 8 hours. She almost kept walking. The motorcycle was lying on its side, maybe 30 feet ahead of her, partially off the road, one wheel still spinning with the lazy, winding down rotation of something that had fallen recently. The headlight was still on, cutting a pale beam across the scrub brush, illuminating nothing useful. She registered it the way she registered everything on the road at night, as a potential threat, as a potential resource, and as a potential situation she did not need to be part of. Her feet slowed without her giving them permission to do so. The man was beside the motorcycle, not on it, beside it, on the ground, in a position that no one chose voluntarily. His hands were behind his back, and even from 30 feet, she could see the way his shoulders were pulled wrong. The particular angle of someone whose wrists were bound. His head was up. He was conscious. His eyes found her before she had decided whether to be found. She stopped. He said, "Keep walking." His voice was exactly what she had noted, internally gravel scraping against itself. Rough and low, and carrying the particular flatness of someone who was in significant pain and refusing to acknowledge it. He said it like a command, like he had the right to command things, even from the ground, with his hands tied behind him. She registered the leather vest, the patches. She knew what those patches meant. Everyone in America knew what those patches meant, whether they wanted to admit it or not. Hell's Angels. The name carried weight, the way certain names always carried weight, loaded with everything people had heard and read and half remembered and chosen to believe. Her rules said, "Keep walking." Her feet said, "Not yet." "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Doesn't matter." He turned his head away from her. "Get out of here. You don't want to be standing here when they come back." "When who comes back?" "Emily." He hadn't asked her name. He couldn't have known her name. He said it anyway, with the flat certainty of someone stating a fact, and, for a single disorienting moment, the entire highway seemed to tilt sideways under her feet. She took a step toward him. "How do you know my name?" He lifted his head and looked at her directly for the first time, and his expression was complicated, pain and recognition and something else underneath both of those things, something that looked almost like relief, mixed with something that looked almost like dread. "I said leave," he told her. "I'm serious. Whatever you're thinking right now, just go." "You know who I am," she said. Wasn't a question. He closed his eyes. He was silent for long enough that she thought he might have lost consciousness. And she took another step, close enough now to see the blood drying on the side of his face and the way his wrists had been bound with the kind of professional efficiency that wasn't accidental. This wasn't the result of a roadside fight that got out of hand. Someone had planned this. Someone had done this with a specific intention in mind. "I know who you are," he finally said, "and that's why you need to leave right now." Emily Carter had spent 14 months surviving by listening to the voice in her head that told her when something was wrong. That voice was very loud at this moment. It was telling her many things simultaneously, and some of them contradicted each other. And the loudest one of all was not the one that said run. It was the one that said, "This man knows something about you." And she had not had anyone know something about her actually know something, specifically know something in a very long time. She unzipped the front pocket of her backpack. The multi-tool was secondhand, purchased at a pawn shop in Flagstaff 3 months ago for $4, and it had turned out to be worth approximately 400 times what she paid for it in terms of practical utility. She had used it to fix a tent frame, to open stuck cans, to strip wire, to remove a strip bolt from a bicycle she had found, and repaired and eventually traded for $40 and a sleeping bag. The blade was small but sharp. The wire cutters were better than they looked. She crouched behind him. "What are you doing?" he said. And it wasn't a question either. It was the voice of a man who already knew what she was doing and was trying to decide how he felt about it. "Holding still would help," she said. The binding on his wrists was a heavy zip tie, 2 of them, linked, professional grade. She worked the blade in carefully, feeling for the right angle, not in a hurry, despite the fact that everything in her body was telling her to hurry. Rushing this would mean cutting him or cutting herself, or snapping the blade, none of which helped anything. She breathed slowly and worked the blade, and in about 40 seconds the plastic gave way and his hands came apart. He made a sound that he probably would have preferred. She hadn't heard brief. Involuntary, the sound of circulation returning painfully to hands that had been cut off from it. He brought his arms forward and sat there for a moment with his eyes closed, breathing. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome." She stood up and stepped back, because proximity to a stranger in the dark still applied regardless of the circumstance. "Now tell me how you know my name." He opened his eyes and looked at her and opened his mouth to say something. The headlights came over the hill behind her. Not one set of headlights. 3. And not car headlights, the distinctive twin beams of motorcycles. Running tight together, moving fast. They crested the hill and the engines hit her ears a moment later. the specific deep-throated sound of machines being pushed hard, and Emily turned and looked and felt the decision point arrive with a clarity that left no room for ambiguity. The man on the ground said very quietly, "Don't run." "What if you run? You look like someone who did something wrong." He was already working to get to his feet, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone assessing damage in real time, determining what worked and what didn't. "Stay still. Stay exactly where you are. Those are more of them. I know. Are they going to hurt you again?" Something passed across his face, a flicker of recognition, almost something like reluctant respect. "No," he said. "Those are mine." The three motorcycles pulled off the road and stopped in a loose formation, engines idling down. The riders were wearing the same cut, same patches, same organizational identity, same signaling of belonging. They were off their bikes before the engines fully died, and they moved toward the man on the ground, toward Jack, which was the name she would learn in the next 2 minutes, with the focused urgency of people who had been looking for someone and found him in worse condition than they'd hoped. The first one reached Jack and grabbed his arm, helping him steady, and the words were low and fast, and contained the kind of shorthand that people used who had known each other long enough to compress entire conversations into half sentences. Emily registered what happened. "And Royce's people." "And how bad?" "And walk it off." The second rider turned and looked at Emily. She had been looked at many ways in the past 14 months. She had been looked at with contempt, with pity, with the particular kind of invisibility that people perfected when they didn't want to acknowledge that a person was a person. And she had been looked at with suspicion and with dismissal, and once or twice with something approaching kindness that never quite committed to itself. This man she would learn he was. Ryan looked at her the way someone looked at a piece of information they hadn't expected and weren't sure what to do with yet. Not threatening, not dismissive, just genuinely, carefully assessing. "You cut him loose?" he asked. "Yes." "You were just walking by?" "I was on the road," she said. Because that was accurate, and she wasn't going to explain the rest of it. Ryan looked at Jack. Some communication happened that Emily wasn't part of. Jack said something quietly that she couldn't fully catch, and Ryan's expression changed in a way she couldn't fully read. And then the third rider, Nathan, said from slightly behind everyone else, with the particular flatness of someone stating something that was not actually a question, "Who is the girl?" It was not directed at her. It was directed at the group. And the way he said it, the specific weight on the word who told her that the question was not about her name. It was about something else. Something they already knew, or suspected, or were in the process of figuring out. Jack said, "Her name is Emily Carter." The silence that followed was not the silence of people hearing an unfamiliar name. It was the silence of people hearing a name they already knew. Ryan said slowly, "Carter." And the third man, Cole, she would learn, turned and looked at her, and then looked away again very quickly, in the deliberate way of someone who needed a moment they weren't going to explain. Emily watched all of this and felt the particular coldness that had nothing to do with the October night air. "You know that name," she said. "All of you know that name." Nobody answered immediately. "Tell me why you know that name." Jack looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize pain and recognition, and that complicated thing underneath them both that she couldn't quite identify yet. "Not here," he said, "not like this." "Then when and where?" He held her gaze. "Come with us," he said. I promise you you'll be safe. Nobody is going to hurt you. But I can't explain what I need to explain, standing on the side of a highway at 4 a.m., with 3 of Royce's people somewhere behind us on this road." Emily Carter had a rule. The rule said, never go anywhere with strangers. She had built that rule carefully. It had served her well. It had kept her alive, and in one piece, through 14 months of situations that would have ended differently if she had ignored it. She looked at Jack. She looked at Ryan and Cole and Nathan, who were watching her with expressions that ranged from careful to complicated, none of which contained anything that her instincts recognized as threat. She thought about what it meant that all 3 of them had gone silent at the sound of her last name. She thought about the way Jack had said, I promise you not the casual deployment of those words as filler, but with the weight of someone who did not use them lightly. She thought about 14 months of surviving, 14 months of the rule, 14 months of keeping herself safe and moving forward and asking nothing of anyone and accepting nothing from anyone and building a life that was technically a life but was not. If she was being honest about it, anything she would have chosen. She said, fine. She would question that decision for approximately the next 10 minutes of the ride, sitting behind Ryan on a motorcycle she had not been invited to but had climbed onto anyway, watching the darkness blur past on both sides of the highway. The cold was worse at speed. The jacket was, in fact, inadequate. Her backpack pressed into her shoulders. She did not question whether Jack had been telling the truth when he said she would be safe. She didn't know why she didn't question it. She had questioned everything for 14 months. She had questioned the motives of every person who looked at her, every person who offered her anything, every person who seemed like they might be approaching her with something that looked like kindness. Something about the way he had said it. Or maybe something about the silence that had followed her name. The clubhouse, she would learn later that this was not a word they used, that they called it the chapter house. That terminology mattered, even if the distinction seemed subtle to someone from the outside was not what she expected. She had an image in her head, assembled from things she had absorbed from popular culture over the years, a vague composite of dark and dangerous and chaotic. What she found was something considerably more complex. It was a converted building that had once been something industrial. The bones of the structure were still visible in the high ceilings and the wide floor space, but it had been lived in and worked in over a period of years, in ways that accumulated into something that felt somehow inhabited. Not comfortable in the way of a place decorated for comfort. Inhabited in the way of a place where people had actually been, where things had happened, where time had collected. The photographs were the first thing she focused on. She didn't mean to focus on them. Her attention went there before she consciously directed it, pulled by the sheer density of images, covering a long section of wall photographs, in frames and photographs pinned directly, and photographs so old they had gone to sepia at the edges. She started reading them the way she read everything, systematically, and what she found did not match the composite image she'd been carrying. Veterans. Dozens of photographs of men in both kinds of vests, the military and the leather, standing together at events that looked like honor rides, at grave sites, at ceremonies. Older men being helped into chairs by younger riders. A photograph of someone mowing a lawn in front of a small house while a woman in her 70s watched from a window with an expression of pure relief. Another of men unloading groceries at what appeared to be a women's shelter. A whole section dedicated to children, kids at charity events. Kids sitting on motorcycles under careful adult supervision. Kids holding handmade signs. She stood in front of the photographs for longer than she intended. Ryan appeared at her shoulder. Not crowding, he kept a careful, deliberate distance that she noticed and appreciated. He said, "You want something to eat? He paused in a way that suggested he was assessing the contents of a kitchen that might not be living up to the moment. "We've got eggs, and I think there's bread, possibly some soup." "I'm fine," she said, which was automatic. He said, "Okay," without making it complicated. And she registered that he had not pushed, had not turned it into a thing, had not insisted in the way that some people insisted on generosity, as a way of making themselves feel better about the fact that the other person needed it. "The photographs," she said, "those are real." "Yeah, I mean, this is what you actually do." He was quiet for a moment. "It's part of what we do," he said carefully. "We're not a charity. We're not a nonprofit. We're a club. And we have all the things that come with that. But yeah, the photographs are real." Jack was somewhere in the building. She had seen him go through a door with Cole, and she had heard the low murmur of a conversation she was not part of, and she had not followed. She was choosing to be patient in the way she chose things now, not because it was her instinct, but because she had learned that patience was sometimes the most aggressive move available. Nathan brought her a chair without asking if she wanted one. just placed it nearby with the precise non-committal energy of someone leaving an object somewhere and not commenting on it. And after about 5 minutes, she sat down in it. She was tired. She was more tired than she usually let herself feel, because feeling it didn't help anything. But here in this building, with its photographs and its inhabited quality, and its three men who were being so studiously careful not to make her feel like a problem that needed solving, she let a small portion of the exhaustion surface. Cole came back through the door first. He stopped when he saw her sitting. He looked at her, and then looked away, and then looked back again. And the whole sequence happened in about 2 seconds. But it was enough for her to catch it the way he seemed to be working something out. Some internal debate that she was not privy to. "Cole," she said. He looked at her. "When Ryan said my name, all three of you went quiet." He said nothing. "That's not a coincidence," she said. "That's a reaction. And reactions mean something happened before this. Before tonight. Before the highway." Cole said very carefully, "Let Jack explain it." "Is Jack to explain it?" "I think so. Yes. And if he decides not to." Cole looked at her with the expression of someone genuinely uncertain about the answer to that question. "Then we're going to have a problem," he said. And it came out sounding less like a threat and more like a man who was already calculating the fallout of a scenario he didn't want to occur. Jack came through the door. He had cleaned up, or someone had helped him clean up. The blood was gone from his face, and he was moving better than he had been on the highway, though she could see the way he was favoring his left side. He crossed the room and stood in front of her and did not sit down. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "Yes. I'm going to ask you something first." She waited. "Your father," he said. "Thomas Carter. When did you last see him?" Emily had spent a long time not thinking about her father. Not thinking about him was a skill she had developed with the same disciplined intentionality she had applied to everything else that might have broken her if she had let it. She had a series of mental compartments for things that needed to not exist for the purpose of forward motion. And her father was in one of those compartments, behind a door she kept firmly shut. Jack said his name, and she felt that door move. 3 years ago, she said. Her voice was steady because she made it steady. He left. He was there, and then he wasn't. No explanation. No note. "That's what you know," Jack said. "That's what happened." "No," he said, and the single word landed with a weight that she felt physically. "That is not what happened." She looked at him. "Your father found something," Jack said, "about 4 years ago. He was working. I don't need to get into everything right now, but he was in a position where he had access to information that certain people did not want accessed. He found documentation of financial crimes involving vulnerable people, people who had nothing, people who were being systematically exploited, elderly people, families in crisis. He found evidence that linked those crimes to someone with enough power and enough reach to make that evidence disappear, along with anyone who carried it." Emily's hands were very still in her lap. "He came to us," Jack said. "Not directly. He went through channels that eventually brought him to our attention. He wasn't asking for protection for himself. He was asking for help getting the documentation somewhere it couldn't be buried." "What does this have to do with me?" she asked. But she already knew. She could feel the shape of it before he said it. When things moved faster than he expected, Jack said, when it became clear that the people he was up against had identified him and were moving against him, he made a decision. He went dark. Not because he was running. Because he was trying to draw the danger away from someone. "From me," she said. "From you." She heard her own breathing in the silence. "He didn't abandon you," Jack said. "He left to protect you. And he hid everything he'd gathered, all the documentation, all the evidence somewhere he believed you could find if you ever needed to. Because he didn't trust anyone else to find it," she said. "Because he only trusted you." Emily Carter sat in a chair in a Hells Angels chapter house at 5 in the morning and held the door of the compartment shut with every ounce of focus she had. Because if she let it open right now, she would not be functional. And she needed to be functional because there were questions she needed to ask and things she needed to understand, and she could not afford to fall apart in front of Four men she had known for approximately 2 hours. The documents you were carrying, she said to Jack. The ones the men who attacked you were looking for. He nodded. Those are connected to what my father found. They're part of the same trail. And Royce, she said, the name he had used on the highway. Royce is the person my father was documenting. Jack was quiet for a moment. He's part of it, he said. Who's above him? Jack looked at her and she could see him making a decision. She could see the exact moment when he decided how much to say and how much to hold back, and she recognized it because she had watched people make that decision about her for 14 months, and she had gotten very good at reading the mechanics of it. Jack, she said, I have been living on the side of the road for over a year. I do not need to be protected from difficult information. I need the truth. He held her gaze. Where are the documents your father hid? He asked instead of answering. She looked at him. She thought about the question. She thought about what it meant that he was asking her that he believed she knew or might know or would know once she thought about it hard enough. She turned the question over and felt it settle against something she had not examined in 3 years. Something she had put away with the same deliberateness that she had used on everything she couldn't afford to think about. There was a place, not a place she had been recently, not a place she had let herself think about. A place from before, from the life she had been living when she still had a life that looked like something, when she still had a father who was present, and a future that seemed continuous. A place he had taken her to once, only once, when she was 18, and he was still the version of her father she had believed in completely. He had said something then, something she had not understood at the time, something she had filed away in the archive of things her brain held on to without her permission. She had not thought about it in 3 years. She thought about it now, and she felt the shape of it click into something that changed everything. I need to think, she said. Jack said, okay, not out loud, just I need to think. Take all the time you need. She looked at him. Whoever came after you tonight, how much time do we actually have? The pause before he answered told her everything. Not as much as I'd like, he said. She closed her eyes and held the memory carefully, the way she held anything fragile, and she turned it over and looked at what it meant now that she had context she hadn't had when it was formed. And somewhere in the quiet of that chapter house, with Ryan and Cole and Nathan maintaining a careful, respectful distance, and Jack watching her with an expression she now understood better. The combination of recognition and dread was the expression of someone who had been carrying a truth they weren't sure how to give back to its owner. Emily Carter began to understand that the 14 months she had spent surviving had not been meaningless. They had been preparation. The question was what she was prepared for. She didn't sleep. That wasn't unusual. Emily Carter had stopped expecting sleep to come easily sometime around month 4 of living without walls, when she had learned that the body's relationship with rest changed fundamentally once the body understood that rest was not guaranteed. You slept when you could, lightly, and with one part of your brain always listening, and you did not expect the deep unconscious surrender that people with beds and locks and addresses took for granted. But this was a different kind of not sleeping. Ryan had shown her to a back room clean, spare, a cot with a blanket that was worn but solid, and had said, with the same careful, non-pressure she was coming to associate with him specifically, that she didn't have to stay, but she was welcome to, and there was no obligation attached to either choice. She had stayed. She had lain on the cot with her backpack under her head, and her eyes open, and her mind doing the thing it was doing, which was turning over everything Jack had told her, the way you turned over a stone to see what was living underneath it. Her father had not abandoned her. She tested that sentence the way you tested weight-bearing surfaces when you weren't sure they would hold carefully, with pressure applied incrementally, waiting for the give that would tell you not to trust it. Because she had built an entire architecture of survival on the understanding that her father had left. She had built her anger on it, and her grief on it, and eventually her forward motion on it, that specific fuel of a person who has been left and has decided the only response to being left is to keep moving. If that foundation was wrong. If Thomas Carter had not walked away from her, but had been pushed, then she was not sure what the structure built on top of it was made of anymore. She didn't cry. She noted the pressure behind her eyes, and she breathed against it, and she did not cry. Because crying was something she could do later, privately, in a context where it served some purpose beyond simply happening. What she did instead was think about the place. The cabin was in the mountains northeast of Prescott, accessible by a dirt road that most people drove past without noticing because there was nothing about it that signaled destination. Her father had taken her there once she was 18, 2 months past her birthday, and he had told her they were going camping, which was unusual because camping was not something they did. It had never been part of the rhythm of their life together, and she had been mildly suspicious of the agenda in the way of an 18-year-old who considers spontaneous parental enthusiasm to be evidence of something being managed. They had hiked for most of a day, and he had been quiet in a particular way, not unhappy, not distracted, but present in a focused manner that was different from his ordinary presence. At the end of it, at a specific spot, near a rock formation that looked like a fist coming up from the earth, he had stopped and looked at her and said something she had filed under the general category of Dad being cryptic. He had said, "If I ever ask you to remember something, this is where you come." And she had said, with the patience of a teenager humoring a parent, "Okay, Dad." And that had been the whole of it. No further explanation. No context. She had assumed it was some kind of survivalist impulse he was having, or the echo of a book he'd read, or just one of those things adults said that made sense inside their own heads and didn't necessarily need to translate. She had filed it and not retrieved it until Jack asked her where the documents were, and the memory had surfaced with the specific precision of something that had been waiting. She was still turning this over when the voices started. Not loud, not alarmed, but distinct enough that she could hear them through the wall, and the quality of the conversation, its tension, its careful lowered register was enough to pull her out of the cot and put her ear to the door without her having made a conscious decision to do so. Ryan's voice, "She can't stay here long term." Jack's voice, "I know that. And she can't go back out there. Not now that Royce's people have seen her face. I know that too. So what are we doing, Jack? Because right now we've got a woman sleeping 20 feet away who doesn't know half of what she needs to know. And we've got Royce somewhere out there figuring out who cut you loose. And we've got documents that people have already committed serious violence to get their hands on. And I'd really like to understand what the plan is." A pause. Then Jack, "The plan is we keep her safe while we figure out the next step." "That's not a plan. That's a posture, Ryan. I'm serious. She asked you straight out tonight. She looked right at you and asked you for the truth. And you gave her pieces of it. Useful pieces, I'll grant you. But pieces." Another pause, longer this time. "There are things she doesn't know yet that she needs time to be ready for." Does she need time? Or do you need time? Because those are two different things. And I want to make sure you're not confusing them. Emily stood very still on her side of the door. Cole's voice entered from further away, as if he had been in another part of the room. "Both. If we're being honest, it's both. Ryan, what does that mean?" Cole, "It means the thing Jack hasn't told her yet isn't just about her father. It's about what her father found. Specifically, what he found, and who it connects to. And once she knows that, there is no unknowing it, and her life, whatever she's been trying to build back, changes permanently. So yeah, Jack needs time and so does she. The question is whether Royce is going to give either of them any." Silence. Then Ryan, very quietly, "How much does she know about her father's work? Like before. What he actually did, Jack. She knows he worked in finance. She knows it was connected to property and development. She doesn't know the specifics of the account he was managing before he went dark. Because the specifics are, yeah, and the name on those documents, yeah. She's going to find out," Ryan said. "She's smart. I watched her for 20 minutes tonight. She is going to put it together, with or without us telling her. And if she puts it together on her own, she's going to be furious that we held it back." Jack said, "I know." "So why?" "Because I made a promise," Jack said. and his voice had changed lower, more personal, the voice of someone who was not talking about tactics anymore. I made a promise to her father before he went dark. He said, whatever happens, don't let it land on her all at once. Don't give her a single moment that breaks her. He said give her ground to stand on first, and then give her the truth. The silence that followed was the longest yet. Then Nathan, who had been so quiet, Emily had forgotten he was in the room. She already has ground. She was standing on it when she cut your zip ties on the side of Route 89. You might want to factor that in. Emily stepped back from the door. She sat on the edge of the cot and held her own hands together and breathed slowly and thought about what she had just heard and what she had not heard and the specific shape of the thing that was being kept from her, which she could feel the outline of even if she couldn't see it yet, the way you could feel furniture in a dark room by the resistance of the air. Her father had asked Jack to go slowly. Her father had anticipated that she might need protecting from this particular truth. Her father, who had disappeared 3 years ago to protect her, had thought about this, had considered it, had built a protocol around it that accounted for her specific vulnerabilities and her specific strengths, and had tried to give her a fighting chance without being destroyed by it. She did not know whether to be furious or grateful. She realized, both. She lay back on the cot and put her arm over her eyes and waited for morning. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving with the practical efficiency of a person who had made coffee in this kitchen many times and knew exactly where everything was. Emily came out of the back room with her backpack and her jacket and found Ryan at a small table with 2 mugs, one of which he slid toward the empty chair across from him without comment. She sat. The coffee was strong enough to qualify as a structural material, and she appreciated that. Ryan said nothing. He drank his coffee and looked at the table, and she drank hers and looked at the table, and the silence between them was the functional kind, the kind that wasn't asking to be filled, just existing until one of them had something worth saying. She said, "How long have you known my father?" Ryan looked up. He met her eyes and held them and did not look away and did not perform anything. "About 2 years before he went dark," he said. "So you knew him?" "Not well. Through Jack, mostly. But yeah, I knew him." "What was he like?" Ryan thought about it, not reaching for the comfortable generality that people reached for when talking about someone who was gone. "Precise," he finally said. Everything he said, he meant. He didn't waste words. He didn't perform things. He just said what he meant and did what he said. Emily turned the mug in her hands. "That sounds like him. He talked about you." She looked up. "Not constantly, but when you came up, which was not infrequently, he was specific. He didn't generalize. He said, 'Emily does this. Emily thinks this way. Emily will understand this if you explain it from this angle.'" Ryan paused. "He knew you well." She set the mug down carefully. "He didn't leave because he wanted to," Ryan said. And he said it simply, without making it into an event. Just information, delivered plainly. Because she had been waiting for someone to say it plainly. "I want you to know that I know that. Not because Jack told me to say it. Because I watched him make that decision and I know what it cost him." Emily pressed her lips together and nodded once. "Okay," she said. She spent the morning moving through the chapter house with the particular awareness of someone learning a space that might need to be navigated under different conditions. She was not subtle about it, and she did not pretend to be. Cole noticed and did not comment on it, which she appreciated. Nathan noticed and offered with the economy of someone who was not naturally verbose, to show her where the exits were, which she appreciated more. He walked her through it without narration. Just movement, this door, this window, this back entrance that looked like it was sealed but wasn't if you knew which latch to lift. She committed it all to memory the way she had committed Route 89's shoulders to memory. The way she committed everything to memory that might matter. Because memory was one of the few things that was entirely hers and required no maintenance and weighed nothing. She said, "Nathan." He stopped. "In the documents Jack was carrying. My father's name is in them." Nathan looked at her steadily. Yeah. As a witness, as someone who collected the evidence, Nathan was quiet. Or as something else. Jack should be the one I'm asking you, she said. Not because I want to go around Jack. Because I need to know if I should be bracing for something. Nathan studied her for a moment. He was the quietest of the three, and she had noticed that quiet people of his particular variety, still rather than absent, contained rather than withdrawn, were often the ones who were paying the most attention. He said, "Your father's name is in those documents as a collector of evidence. That's the primary context. But there's a secondary context that's more complicated. Tell me." "There's an account from before he went dark. A financial account that he managed that was used to move money that he didn't know at the time was dirty. When he figured out what it was being used for, he stopped. He pulled the documentation. He brought it to us." Nathan paused. "But the account exists, and his name is attached to it. And the people who want those documents back are not interested in explaining the context." Emily absorbed this. "They'd use it against him. They'd use it against you," Nathan said. Since we don't know where he is." "Against me how?" "Leverage," Nathan said. "You're the one who knows where the hidden evidence is. If they can hold something over you, something that implicates your father, that could be used to destroy whatever reputation he has left. That could complicate any legal case he might want to make. If he surfaces, then they have a reason for you to cooperate." She stood with this for a long moment. "That's what Jack wasn't telling me." "Part of it," Nathan said. And the two words landed with the specific weight of someone confirming that there was more, without specifying what the more was. She filed that away. Jack appeared in the late morning with the particular energy of someone who had been on the phone and was carrying the results of that phone call in his body. He found Emily in the main room, sitting cross-legged on a bench, her backpack beside her, her expression composed in the way of a person who has been doing significant internal work and has arrived at a result. He said, "We need to talk." She said, "We do." He sat down across from her. He looked like he had slept maybe 2 hours. His left side was still bothering him. She could see it in the way he sat. The slight adjustment. He laced his fingers together on the table and looked at her and seemed to be deciding where to start. She decided for him. "Royce's people are looking for me specifically." He did not look surprised that she knew. "Yes." "Because they know I'm Thomas Carter's daughter." "Yes." "And they know my father hid evidence. And they believe I know where it is." "We believe that too," he said. "To be clear, do you believe I know where it is?" He looked at her carefully. "Do you?" She held his gaze. "I think so, yes." Something shifted in his expression, relief, and something more complicated simultaneously. "Then we have a problem. Because if we know you might know, Royce definitely knows. And Royce has people who are considerably less patient than we are." "Who is Royce?" she said. "Specifically, give me the whole picture." Jack ran a hand across the back of his neck. "Martin Royce. He runs a development company that operates across 6 states. On the surface, it's legitimate. He buys distressed properties. He develops them. He sells them. What's under the surface is a systematic operation that has been targeting elderly homeowners and families in financial crisis for the past 8 years. Fraudulent paperwork, coerced signatures, threats when cooperation wasn't forthcoming. He has moved hundreds of families out of homes they should have been able to keep." He paused. "He also has significant connections to local government in 3 of those 6 states, which is why nothing has stuck to him. Every time evidence surfaces, it disappears. Every time a case gets built, it collapses. Because he has people inside the systems that are supposed to hold him accountable. And my father found the documentation that connected him to all of it." "Your father found the financial backbone of the whole operation," Jack said. "The accounts, the paper trail, the proof that it wasn't just aggressive business practice, it was orchestrated fraud on a massive scale. That documentation, if it reached the right hands, would not just take down Royce. It would take down several of the people above him in the structure. There are people above him." "Always," Jack said. She looked at him steadily. "What's the name above his?" He hesitated. "Jack." "It's a name you might recognize," he said carefully. From before your father went dark. The sentence sat between them. She thought about her father's professional life. The parts of it she had known, the clients he mentioned, the accounts he managed, the names that drifted through their household with the specificity of real people rather than the vague generality of professional abstraction. She turned through them. Most were neutral. Most were just names. One was not. She said the name. Jack's expression confirmed it before he opened his mouth. She said it again, quietly, to herself, testing the reality of it. My father was managing accounts for. He didn't know, Jack said immediately. I want to be absolutely clear about that. When he took the account, he didn't know what was behind it. When he found out, he stopped everything and started documenting it. That is why he is a witness and not a perpetrator. But yes, the name above Royce is the name you just said. Emily Carter sat in a Hells Angels chapter house in the growing light of an Arizona morning and rearranged her entire understanding of the last 3 years around a single piece of information. The man her father had been afraid of was not some abstract criminal. He was not a stranger. He was someone whose name had been spoken in her own home, at her own kitchen table, as part of the ordinary professional texture of her father's ordinary professional life. And when her father had realized what was behind that name, he had run, not from Emily toward her safety. Ryan said, my father talked about me, she said. He talked about you constantly, Jack said, and his voice had changed again, that personal register, the one that bypassed strategy and arrived somewhere more honest. He said you were the most capable person he knew. He said that every decision he made it calculating what it would cost you. He said, he stopped. What? Jack looked at his hands. He said, the worst part of going dark wasn't the fear. It was knowing that you'd probably think he left you on purpose. He said it would probably make you stronger, knowing you. But he also said it would hurt you in a way that was, he stopped again. He said it would hurt you in a way that was going to be hard to come back from. She made herself breathe. He was right, she said. I know, but he was also right that it made me stronger. I know that too, Jack said. We've been watching you for a while, Emily. It wasn't surveillance for a bad reason. It was your father asking us to make sure you were okay. We've been keeping eyes on you since about 8 months after he went dark. She went very still. Keeping eyes on me, she repeated. He needed to know you were alive. For 8 months after he disappeared, someone was watching me. Yes, she thought about the past 14 months. She thought about the months before that, the apartment she'd lost when she couldn't make rent after her father disappeared, and the income she'd relied on had evaporated with him. The jobs that hadn't been enough, the slow structural collapse of a life that had depended on a foundation that got pulled out without warning. She thought about the people she had seen and not registered, the vehicles she had noted and dismissed. 8 months after he went dark, I lost my apartment, she said. We know. And then I was on the road, we know. And someone was watching me while I was on the road, Jack said very carefully. We made sure you were never in immediate danger. There are 2 situations where Cole or Ryan intervened without my knowledge, she said. Yes. The anger arrived, and it was large and it was legitimate, and she let herself feel it fully before she decided what to do with it. She felt it the way she felt cold, the way she felt hunger as information, as data, as something her body was correctly reporting that now needed to be processed. You could have come to me, she said. At any point in 14 months, you could have come to me and told me. What your father asked us to tell you was nothing, Jack said. He said, make sure she's safe. Don't tell her anything until you have something solid enough to give her a path forward, not just a burden. His voice was careful and even, and she could hear in it the quality of someone who had argued about this internally and had not fully won the argument. I disagree with that decision, for what it's worth. I think you deserved more, sooner. But that was his call to make, and I honored it. And I'm telling you this now because I think you deserve to know the whole of what happened. The room was very quiet. Ryan appeared in the doorway with the particular quality of someone who had been listening and was not pretending otherwise. Cole was behind him. Nathan stood slightly to the side of both of them. They were not performing solidarity. They were just there. All three of them. With the simple, present tense weight of people who had made a decision about where to stand. She looked at all four of them. Then she looked at Jack. "You said he believed I know where the evidence is," she said. "Yes. And you said Royce's people are going to come looking." "Already are. So we don't have the luxury of going slow." "No," he said. "We don't." She picked up her backpack. She ran her thumb over the strap where the buckle had been repaired with wire. She had done that herself 4 months ago, standing behind a gas station in Cottonwood. She thought about everything her body had learned in 14 months that she would never have chosen to learn, and that had, she was realizing, been preparation for this specific thing she now needed to do. "There's a location in the mountains northeast of Prescott," she said. "My father took me there once. He said if he ever asked me to remember something, that was where to come." She looked at Jack. "He never asked. But I think he planned to." Jack looked at her steadily. "I know the road," she said. "I know the trail. I know the specific spot." "When?" Jack asked. "Not yet," she said. And the two words surprised her as they came out, not because she didn't mean them, but because she recognized where they were coming from. She was not being careful on behalf of herself. She was being careful on behalf of the people in this room who had agreed to carry something that was not theirs to carry and had carried it anyway. "There's something I still don't have," she said. "There's a piece of what you know that nobody's said out loud yet. Nathan told me there were 2 contexts for my father's name in those documents. Jack told me about the financial account, but Nathan said part of it. And you," she looked at Jack, "you stopped mid-sentence twice last night." The 4 men looked at each other. She watched the look pass between them, the specific shorthand of people deciding, in real time, in front of the person the decision was about. Jack said, "Sit back down." She sat. He leaned forward and put his arms on the table and looked at her directly and said, 3 months ago, we received a communication." She waited. "It was routed through channels that are complicated. The kind of channels that take time and trust to establish and maintain. And the communication contained a proof of life." The air went out of the room. "Your father is alive," Jack said, "or was 3 months ago. And the communication, it wasn't just confirmation of life. It was a message for you." Emily Carter did not move. "We've been trying to figure out the safest way to give it to you," he said. "Because giving it to you means telling you he's alive. And telling you he's alive means telling you where he might be. And telling you where he might be makes you a target for people who would love nothing more than to use you to find him," she said. And her voice was steady. It was completely steady. Because she was not going to break in front of these men, she refused. "What does the message say?" Jack reached into his jacket and removed a folded piece of paper and placed it on the table between them. She looked at it. She looked at the paper that her father had written on 3 months ago, "Wherever he was alive." She reached out and picked it up. And the room held its breath while Emily Carter read the first words her father had sent her in 3 years. And the decision that had been forming in her since 4 a.m. on a deserted Arizona highway finished forming, and she folded the paper carefully and put it in the front pocket of her backpack, next to the multi-tool. And she looked at Jack and said, "Tell me everything you know about Royce's operation. All of it. Tonight." They talked through the night. Not the careful, managed version of talking that Jack had been doing since the highway, the measured disclosure, the strategic sequencing, the architecture of a man giving information in the order he had decided was safest. This was different. This was Emily asking specific questions and demanding specific answers, and not absolute questions that had served well enough when she didn't know what she was deflecting around. She had read her father's letter twice. She had folded it back into her pocket without showing it to anyone, and nobody had asked. The 4 men around her had waited, and when she looked up from the paper and said, "Tell me everything," something in her voice had communicated that the previous version of this conversation, the one where they decided what she was ready for, was finished. Jack started with Royce's structure, and this time he didn't abbreviate. Martin Royce's development company was called Meridian Property Group, and it operated across Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. The legitimate surface of it was exactly that: legitimate, documented, auditable. He paid taxes, he filed the right paperwork. He employed over 200 people who had no knowledge of what ran underneath the business they worked for. The way you could live in a house without knowing what was in the walls. What was in the walls was a secondary operation that had been running for 8 years, and its mechanism was elegant in the way that predatory systems were sometimes elegant, designed to exploit the specific vulnerability of people who needed money fast and didn't have the resources to fight back. Royce's scouts identified properties owned outright by elderly homeowners, by families in medical crisis, by people facing foreclosure on secondary mortgages. They made offers that looked like rescue. The paperwork was real, but the terms were buried. The signatures were obtained in conditions that a good attorney could argue were coercive, but that Royce attorneys had spent years making difficult to prove. And when the properties transferred, the people who had signed received a fraction of what they were owed and had, in many cases, already signed away their right to dispute it. 247 families across 6 states in 8 years. That was the number Jack gave her, and he gave it without softening it, and she received it the same way. My father managed one of the accounts that moved the money, Emily said. She was not asking. He managed 3 accounts for a holding company called Vantage Pacific, Jack said. He was brought in through a referral, normal channels. Everything looked clean. He managed those accounts for about 16 months before he started noticing inconsistencies. What kind of inconsistencies? The money moved in patterns that didn't match the status of the transaction. Large amounts arriving from multiple small sources, being redistributed in ways that a legitimate property development company didn't need. He flagged it internally. He was told it was a restructuring initiative. He flagged it a second time and was told more firmly to leave it alone. Cole took over here, and Emily noticed that this part, the part about what Thomas Carter had done next, Cole told with the specific quality of someone who had genuine respect for the person being described. Your father didn't leave it alone, Cole said. He started pulling the thread. He spent about 6 months documenting everything he could access: account movements, transaction records, the names attached to the holding companies that were receiving and distributing funds. He was careful. He kept copies in multiple locations. He built a case that was thorough enough that any federal investigator worth their salary could use it to prosecute. And then he came to you, Emily said. He came to Jack first, Cole said, through a mutual contact. He needed people who were outside the legal system, but who he could trust to hold the documentation while he figured out how to get it to the right authorities without it being intercepted. Why not go directly to the FBI? He tried, Jack said. He made one contact, one careful, anonymous contact, and within 72 hours, he had 2 people from Royce's organization showing up at his workplace asking questions that were not questions. That told him something he needed to know. That Royce had someone inside, Emily said. At the federal level, Jack confirmed. He didn't know who or how high. He just knew that the standard channels were not safe. So he needed intermediaries. People who were not part of any system that Royce could monitor. Emily thought about her father sitting across from Jack for the first time. She tried to build the scene in her head: her father, who was precise and careful and did not waste words, explaining to a man he didn't know that he needed help that the law couldn't provide from people who operated outside its framework. She thought about what that decision had cost him, what it had cost him before he made it, the weeks or months of turning it over, the calculus of trust in a situation where trusting the wrong person meant everything collapsed. What happened to the copies? She asked. The ones he kept in multiple locations. 2 of the 3 locations were compromised within a week of him going dark, Jack said. Whoever moved against him was systematic. They found the storage unit he rented in Tucson. They found the safety deposit box in Flagstaff. But not the 3rd location. Not the 3rd location. Because the 3rd location is the one he took me to, Emily said. The room was quiet, Ryan said, from where he had been standing near the wall, very quietly. Yeah, she understood now with full clarity why her father had taken her camping at 18, why he had said what he said at that specific spot near that specific rock formation, why he had made it memorable without explaining why it needed to be memorable. He had built a failsafe. He had built a failsafe that he hoped he would never need to use, that he had built anyway because he was her father, and he thought the way she thought, and he understood that some things needed a backup plan for the backup plan. He knew, she said, even back then, 4 years before he went dark, he already knew something was wrong. He'd been watching the patterns for about a year when he took you there, Jack said. He wasn't sure yet, but he was careful enough to be building contingencies before he had confirmation. Emily pressed her hands flat against the table. She was working through the timeline, mapping it against the years she had lived through, and the alignment was doing something to her chest that she wasn't going to name right now. "What's in the letter?" Nathan said suddenly. He said it the way he said most things, simply, directly, without performing the question. But it wasn't intrusive. He asked it the way someone asked, who genuinely needed to know and understood that she might say none of your business. And that would be fine too. She looked at him. "He tells me to trust you," she said. "All 4 of you, specifically. He uses your names." She paused. "He says he's sorry. Not in a general way, specifically. He says he's sorry for Route 89. She looked at Jack. He knew I'd end up on that highway. Jack's expression did something complicated. "He says the evidence at the location is everything that's needed," she continued. "He says it's waterproofed and sealed, and he's checked it twice. He says," she stopped for a moment, breathed, continued. "He says when this is done, he wants to know where I've been. All of it. He wants to hear every part of the last 3 years. The last sentence cost her something to say out loud. She kept her voice level and paid the cost and moved forward. "The problem," Jack said, and she could hear in his voice that they were transitioning from the emotional territory back to the operational territory, which she was grateful for, "is getting to that location without Royce knowing where we're going. If his people are already in the area." "They're already in the area," Ryan said. "I got confirmation an hour ago. 3 vehicles, 2 of which are definitely Royce's. The plates connect to a Shell LLC that Cole traced back to Meridian twice before. They're sitting on the main roads in and out of Prescott." Emily looked at Ryan. "They know the general area. They know your father worked in that region. They know the copies they found in Tucson and Flagstaff were both within the same geographic footprint. They're covering their bets. But they don't know the specific location." "Not yet," Cole said. "But there's a limit on that. They're not going to sit on those roads indefinitely without narrowing it down. Every day we wait, their search radius gets tighter." She looked at Jack. "We need to move." "I know." He held her gaze. She could see him running the logistics, the risk calculations, the operational variables. He said, "We move in 4 hours. Cole and Nathan will take the eastern approach and run interference on the 2 vehicles at the junction of 89 and 69. Ryan takes the main road in a plain vehicle to pull eyes. You and I go up the back route." "There's no road up the back," she said. "No," Jack said. She understood. On foot, the 2 of them. The same trail she and her father had hiked 16 years ago. "How's your left side?" she asked. He said, "Fine." She said, "You hesitated." "It's fine enough," he said, and she let it go. The 4 hours moved with the paradoxical slowness and speed of preparation, where individual tasks felt endless and the total time disappeared. Cole laid out a map, and she traced the route from memory, which was sharp in the way of things experienced at 18 and filed whole. Ryan made calls, in a voice too low for her to catch the content, and from the efficiency of his manner, she understood that the club had more structure and more reach than 4 men in a converted building, that what she was seeing was the tip of something larger that was mobilizing on her behalf, and that she hadn't been asked to authorize because authorization had been given a long time ago by someone who trusted these men in a way he hadn't been able to explain to her until now. Nathan came and sat beside her while she was checking her backpack, not next to her, exactly. The considerate distance he maintained, but near enough to talk without raising his voice. "You want to know what you're walking into," he said. I already know what I'm walking into. You know the logistics, he said. You don't know how Royce is going to respond once he figures out what you're doing. And he's going to figure it out, probably before you're back down that mountain. Then tell me. His pattern, when he feels the evidence closing in, is not to run. He doesn't run. He has enough infrastructure and enough compromised officials that he feels insulated. His pattern is to go directly at the source of the threat and neutralize it. Nathan paused. He's done it before. The two witnesses who tried to go to state authorities in Nevada in 2021, both of them withdrew their statements within a week. One of them moved out of state the following month. The other one is still in Nevada, but you can't get him to say the word Royce in any context. He threatened them, Emily said. He made them understand that the people they loved were not safe, Nathan said. That's his specific move. He doesn't typically threaten the principals. He goes around them. She held that. I don't have people, she said. It came out without bitterness, just as a statement of fact. That's the one thing 14 months on the road gave me. There's nobody he can go around to. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. You have us, he said. She looked at him. I'm not saying that to be dramatic, he said, with the particular flatness of a man who was never dramatic. I'm saying it because it's operationally relevant. He's going to try to use us against you once he understands the connection. You need to know that going in so you don't make a decision based on protecting us that puts the mission at risk. We can handle ourselves. Your job is the evidence. She nodded. Understood. Okay. He stood up. The trail from the secondary trailhead to the rock formation your father described, I pulled satellite imagery. It's about 4.5 miles at moderate elevation gain. You'll be up there 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours total. Call it 3 hours round trip with time at the site. She looked at him. You pulled satellite imagery of the location. About 30 minutes after you described it. She said, you're better at this than you look. Nathan said, most people are, and went back to whatever he had been doing. They left the chapter house before dawn had fully resolved into morning. In the gray light interval that felt like the world holding its breath, Jack drove. Emily sat in the passenger seat with her backpack between her feet and her father's letter in her jacket pocket, and the muscle memory of a trail she had walked once at 18 living somewhere in her body, waiting to be asked for. They drove without the radio. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had established enough of a baseline in the last several hours that they didn't need to fill space. She watched the terrain shift as they moved northeast, the particular quality of the Arizona landscape changing as elevation increased. And she did not comment on it because she had learned not to talk about things that were happening around her and instead talk about things that mattered. The name above Royce, she said. Jack kept his eyes on the road. What about it? Warren Aldous. He said nothing, which was confirmation. Warren Aldous was not someone the average person knew. He was not a public figure in the conventional sense. He didn't seek attention. He didn't appear in gossip pages or political commentary. But he existed in the background of enough significant things in Arizona and Nevada and beyond that. People who paid attention to the movement of money and power knew his name with a specific quality of knowing the kind that came within. Understanding that saying it too loudly in certain contexts had consequences. Her father had managed accounts for a company whose ultimate beneficial owner was Warren Aldous. She had heard that name once at their kitchen table, spoken in passing, attached to nothing more concerning than a dinner party anecdote about a mutual acquaintance. It had lodged in her memory the way names sometimes did, without explanation, without significance. Now it had significance. How high does it go above him? She asked. We don't know the ceiling, Jack said. The documentation your father compiled goes up to Aldous, clearly. What's above Aldous is inference and pattern matching. But Aldous is enough. Aldous is more than enough if the evidence is what your father said it was. It will be, she said. She didn't know why she was certain. She was certain. They parked at a trailhead that was unmarked and unlikely to attract attention. Nathan had identified it from the satellite imagery as the closest legal parking to the secondary approach. Jack moved without complaint, but she watched his left side, and she could see that the injury from the night before was something more than he was admitting. She did not push it, because pushing it would not help, and he would not stop regardless of what she said. The trail asked for attention, and she gave it attention. The terrain was not forgiving, but it was familiar. In a way she hadn't expected, the body's memory of physical experience was different from the mind's, more textured, more immediate, and as they climbed, she felt 14 years past version of herself rising up through her like something that had been buried and was now being asked to walk again. They were 40 minutes up when Jack said, "Ryan just checked in. Cole and Nathan have both vehicles accounted for and stationary." Good. He also said there's a third vehicle he didn't expect. She stopped and turned. Where? Moving toward the main trailhead. Not toward us, but moving. That's a complication. Ryan's redirecting. Jack kept his voice level. It's handled. Keep moving. She turned back and kept moving. The communication from Ryan, pieces over the next hour, relayed through Jack's phone, and she listened to the updates the way she listened to weather, as information she was going to have to navigate, regardless of what she thought about it. The third vehicle had stopped at the main trailhead, and 2 people had gotten out. Ryan was running plates. Cole had moved to a secondary position that gave him visibility on both the junction and the trailhead approach. An hour and 20 minutes in, she felt it. Not a sound or a sight, just the specific quality of the air and the incline and the shape of the terrain under her feet, shifting into something that matched the map in her body. She turned left off the main trail without hesitating, following a path that was not a path, that was just the memory of how her father walked when he knew where he was going. Jack said, "You sure?" "Yes," she said. The rock formation appeared through the trees, the fist coming up from the earth, exactly as she had remembered it, exactly as it had always been, unchanged by the 16 years she had spent not looking at it. She stopped in front of it, and she felt the pressure behind her eyes again and again as she held it back because this was not the moment. She moved around the left side of the formation, following something she couldn't have articulated if asked, but that felt like gravity. And at the base of the south face, there was a split in the rock that was not visible unless you were looking for it, and not findable unless you knew it was there. She crouched down. She reached in. Her fingers found plastic heavy-duty weatherproof material, sealed twice. She pulled it out and stood with it in her hands and looked at it and breathed. "Is that it?" Jack asked. His voice was very quiet. "Yes," she said. She opened it with hands that were steady because she made them steady. The waterproofing had held 3 years of mountain weather, and the contents were intact. A flash drive, a bound set of printed documents rubber-banded, a small notebook in her father's handwriting, and a photograph. She picked up the photograph and looked at it and felt the door of the compartment swing open all the way. The one she had been holding shut since Jack said his name on the highway. The photograph was of her father and her. She was maybe 10 years old, standing in front of a car with her face turned up toward him, laughing at something. And he was looking at her with the specific expression of a parent watching a child and trying to memorize the moment in real time. She did not look at the photograph for long. She put it carefully in her jacket pocket alongside the letter and sealed the plastic container over the remaining documents. She stood up and turned around and found herself looking at a man she did not know who was standing 15 feet away with a phone raised and pointed at her. Not a weapon, a phone. She understood what he was doing in the time it took to draw a breath. He was photographing. He was confirming location and confirming what she had retrieved and sending that information somewhere. Jack moved before she finished the thought, not toward the man with the phone, but laterally, putting himself between Emily and the most likely direction any backup would come from, which was the approach they had used to get here. The man with the phone said, "Royce wants those documents." His voice was flat and professional and contained the specific quality of someone who was not making a threat for emotional reasons, but was stating a business position. Emily looked at him. She looked at the phone. She thought about the photograph on her jacket pocket and her father's handwriting in the notebook and 247 families across 6 states and a letter that started with "I'm sorry" and ended with "I want to hear all of it." She said no. The man blinked. People rarely said no in this register simply. Without anger, without fear, without the performance of bravery that people did when they were actually afraid. She said it the way she said the sky was blue. Factual. Concluded. I understand exactly what Royce can do, she said. I've had approximately 12 hours to understand it very thoroughly. And I'm telling you no. You can tell him that, Jack said, very quietly and without inflection. There are 4 people within shouting distance right now who are going to have strong feelings about you taking another step toward her. The man looked at Jack. He looked at Emily. He looked at the sealed container in her hands with the expression of someone calculating probabilities. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Something changed in his face. The professional flatness cracked slightly. And what came through the crack was not aggression. It was something that looked, oddly, like discomfort. He looked at Emily again. He knows your father's location, the man said. The world narrowed to a point. That's not, Jack started. Aldous gave it up, the man said, and he said it with the quality of someone delivering information he had not expected to be delivering. Royce got it an hour ago. He said. The man stopped. He seemed to be choosing between 2 things. He said, tell the girl that her cooperation buys her father's safety. Emily Carter stood on the side of a mountain with her father's life's work in her hands and her father's photograph in her pocket, and the first piece of direct communication she had received from him in 3 years folded against her chest. And she thought about 14 months of surviving alone and what it had taught her about the difference between actual leverage and the performance of leverage. If Royce has my father's location, she said, then he already knows where he is. Which means my cooperation doesn't buy anything. It just makes the problem simpler for Royce. He gets the documents and he already has my father. The only thing my cooperation actually accomplishes is that Royce wins completely. The man was quiet. So no, she said. For the second time, Jack had his phone out. She could see him texting without looking at the screen, the practiced efficiency of someone who had sent many urgent messages without advertising that he was doing so. You should leave, Emily told the man. Right now. He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the container. He made a decision she could see happening in his face, not the calculation arriving at a conclusion, and he took 3 steps back and then turned and walked. And she heard him on the phone before he was out of earshot, his voice low and rapid, delivering a report to someone. The moment he was gone, she turned to Jack. Is it true? Does Royce actually have my father's location? Jack's phone was at his ear. He held up one finger, and she stood still and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that running ahead of information made things worse. He said into the phone, Nathan, the communication Aldous made in the last 2 hours, is there any indication a physical location was transferred? He listened. His expression did the thing she was learning to read the shift from open to closed to something more complicated that lived between the two. He said, check the traffic from the Aldous cell tower in the last 90 minutes. All of it. He listened again. Okay. Yes. Get Ryan off the junction and get him to... He lowered the phone and looked at her and said, we need to move. Right now. Is it true? He started moving back down the approach path and she fell in beside him because standing still was not a productive option regardless of the answer. Nathan thinks there was a communication. Yes. We don't know the content. We don't know if it was a location or something else. But it might be. It might be. She matched his pace and then some because the downhill was faster and her legs were good from 14 months of walking. And she chewed this terrain with her body even if her mind was doing something else entirely. What her mind was doing was the thing it did best, Oste. Under pressure processing, mapping, calculating, following the chain of cause and consequence to its ends. He's not staying where he was, she said. Jack looked at her. My father. He's not a person who stays still under threat. The communication he sent 3 months ago, he knew he'd been getting closer to being found. That's why he sent it when he did. He was establishing a record in case something happened to him and he wasn't able to send another one. She breathed through the downhill pace, kept talking. He's already moved. I'd bet everything on it. You might be right, Jack said. The question is where he moved to, she said. And the only way to know that is to reach him, Jack said. Is to reach him first, she said. They broke out of the trail and hit the flat approach to the parking area, and she saw Ryan's vehicle. There Ryan had repositioned while they were up the mountain, and he was out of the car and moving toward them before they reached it, his expression carrying the specific quality of a man who had several things to report and was prioritizing them in real time. Cole has one of the original vehicles moving, Ryan said, without preamble. It turned east, toward the junction for the highway. The man on the mountain made a call, Emily said. I know, I heard part of it. Ryan looked at Jack. Royce is pulling his people off the roads. Jack said, that's not good news. No, Ryan said. When Royce pulls back, it means he stopped trying to prevent something and started doing something else. Emily looked at both of them. He's going to go directly at the evidence rather than at me, she said. He's pulling back from interception because he thinks he has another play. What play? Ryan said. She thought about what the man on the mountain had said, about the phone that had buzzed, about the expression that had come through the crack in his professional flatness. She thought about timing, the specific timing of the message arriving exactly when it had, exactly at the moment when she had the documents in her hands and had said no, and the standoff was at its most critical point. The phone call Aldous made, she said. Nathan's tracing it? Already on it, Ryan confirmed. I think the location Aldous gave Royce is not my father's location, she said. I think it's something else. Something designed to pull Royce's focus in a direction that gives us a window. Ryan and Jack looked at each other. Your father, Jack said slowly. He's been running for 3 years, Emily said. He's been operating in a network he built carefully. He knows Aldous. He knows what Aldous knows. If he's been working Aldous as a potential source, if he's been feeding Aldous specific information over time, he could control what Aldous has to give, Jack said. He could give Royce a location that pulls his attention while the real move happens somewhere else, Emily said. That would be exactly like him. That would be. She stopped. She thought about the letter. She thought about the specific wording of one particular sentence that she had read twice and filed without fully unpacking it. She pulled the letter out of her pocket and unfolded it, and found the sentence. She read it aloud. When the pieces are in your hands, move fast and move where I told you we'd meet if the world went wrong. Ryan said, where did he told me? She said. She was already walking toward the car. When I was 16. It was a hypothetical. A game he played with me, he called it the emergency plan, and I thought it was just something parents did. Emergency plans. In case of fire or earthquake or... She stopped and turned and looked at both of them. He gave you a meeting place, Jack said. When I was 16, she said. 11 years before he went dark. Gave me a location and he said, if everything goes wrong and we lose each other, this is where we go. And I thought it was a dad thing. A safety thing, like teaching a kid to find a landmark if they get separated at a fair. But it wasn't, Ryan said. He was building the failsafe then too, she said. He was already thinking this way. Before Vantage Pacific. Before Meridian. Before any of it was real. The weight of that, the years of her father's careful, quiet preparation landed somewhere deep. He planned for this specific moment 11 years ago, Jack said. Very carefully. Do you know the location? She looked at him. I know exactly where it is, she said. Tabi. The three of them stood in the morning light at the base of a mountain with 247 families worth of evidence in a sealed container and the thread of her father's life running through their hands and Royce somewhere behind them, pulling his forces in a direction her father had predicted and prepared for, and Emily Carter felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Not safety, not certainty, not the resolution of any of the things that were still very much in play and very much dangerous. She felt, for the first time in a very long time, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Get Cole and Nathan, she said. Tell them to meet us at the highway junction. She picked up her backpack and settled it on her shoulders. felt the familiar weight distribute the familiar way, and looked at Ryan and Jack with an expression that neither of them had seen on her, yet not the careful, composed survival mode that she had worn since the highway, but something sharper and more deliberate and entirely unafraid. "We're done waiting," she said. "We're going to find my father." Ryan drove. He drove the way men drove when time had become a factor that outweighed caution, fast and deliberate and completely focused. The kind of driving that communicated to everyone in the vehicle that there was no room right now for anything except forward motion. Emily sat in the back seat with the sealed container on her lap and her hands flat on top of it, and her mind running the arithmetic of everything she knew against everything she needed to do next. Jack was on the phone. He had been on the phone since they left the trailhead, cycling through calls with the efficiency of a man working multiple lines of a problem simultaneously, and she had stopped trying to follow the individual conversations and was instead reading the aggregate, the tone, the pace, the moments when his voice dropped or sharpened. She was learning to read Jack the way she read terrain. You couldn't always hear every word, but you could feel the elevation changes. Cole's voice came through the speaker. Nathan pulled the Aldous traffic. The communication that went to Royce's people was a set of coordinates. Jack said, "Where do they point?" "A property in Sedona. Commercial building, been vacant for 2 years. Formerly owned by a holding company that traces back." Cole paused. "Traces back to Vantage Pacific." Emily said, "It's a ghost location." Cole said, "Has to be. Nothing there worth protecting. But it's convincing on a map if you don't know the property history." "He fed Aldous the coordinates," Jack said, and he said it with something close to wonder in his voice. "If your father fed Aldous a location he knew, Aldous would eventually give up. He built it into the network of information Aldous had access to, knowing that under enough pressure, Aldous would trade it." "How long has he been building that?" Ryan asked. Emily said, "At least 3 months. That's when the letter was sent. He was already anticipating this sequence." She thought about the letter again, the specific, careful language of it, the things he had said, and the things he had left space for. He had not written it in a hurry. He had written it like a man who had thought for a long time about what his daughter needed to hear and in what order. He knew Royce would eventually get to Aldous. He preemptively controlled what Aldous had to give. Nathan's voice joined Cole's in the speaker. "Royce's vehicles are turning towards Sedona. All 3 of them. That's every mobile asset we've tracked in the last 6 hours." Ryan said, "He just handed us a window." 40 minutes, Jack said. "Maybe 60 if Royce goes into the Sedona property and waits for someone who isn't coming. After that, he figures out he's been played and he pivots." "We need 40 minutes, Emily said. "Tell Cole and Nathan to meet us at the junction and then keep north. Where we're going, I need all of us there." Jack looked back at her. "What's the location?" She had been holding this since she pulled it from the archive of her 16-year-old self. A specific place that existed in her memory with the precision of something she had not chosen to memorize, but that had memorized itself, the way certain things did when the moment of their formation carried a particular emotional weight. She and her father, standing outside a diner in a small town 90 miles north of Phoenix, her mother having died 8 months before. The 2 of them rebuilding the shape of a life that no longer had its center. Her father had looked at the diner and then at her and said, "If everything goes wrong and we lose each other, this is where we go. You come here, you get a booth, you order coffee, and you wait. I will find you. I promise." She had thought about it years later and wondered if he said it because he was already afraid of something, or because he had just lost his wife and was managing the fear that loss plants in a parent, the specific terror of losing the one thing you have left. She understood now that it was both. "There's a diner called Haskell's in a town called Mineral Creek," she said, "off Route 87, about 15 miles east of the main junction. Small town. You drive through it without stopping unless you knew what you were looking for." The car was quiet for a moment. "Your father told you to meet there," Jack said. "When I was 16, yes. After my mother died, she kept her voice even. He said, 'Come here, get a booth, order coffee, and wait.'" He said he would find me. Ryan's hands shifted on the wheel. Not a correction, just an adjustment. The unconscious movement of a person receiving information that had weight. If he built this sequence intentionally, Emily said, if the letter was deliberate and the Aldous coordinates were deliberate and the window he created was deliberate, then the meeting point was always going to be the end point. Not a mountain location, not a chapter house. A diner in a small town that nobody knows about except the two people who were there when he said it. Jack said, he's going to be there. He might be there, she said. Or he's going to get there when he knows it's safe to move. And we have a window right now that he created on purpose. I think he's already moving. Jack was already on the phone to Cole before she finished speaking. They picked up Cole and Nathan at the junction. The handoff was fast. Less than 90 seconds, the two vehicles pulling briefly alongside each other and then reforming into convoy with the practiced ease of people who had done similar things in similar circumstances. Nathan slid into the back seat beside Emily and looked at the sealed container and said nothing, which was what she needed from him right now. Cole called from the second vehicle. Royce's people are in Sedona. One vehicle is inside the property perimeter. The other two are on the access road. He's going to wait about 20 minutes before he starts questioning the intelligence. Then we have 20 minutes of clean road, Jack said. Ryan was already giving the engine everything it had. Emily held the container and thought about her father ordering coffee in a diner booth and waiting for a daughter he had not seen in 3 years. And the thought was large enough that she had to be careful about how much space she gave it. She could feel him, not literally, but in the way of things that were emotionally real before they were physically confirmed. She could feel him moving toward the same point she was moving toward, the two lines of a geometry problem converging on a single answer. But there was something she was still carrying, something that had been sitting in the back of her processing since the man on the mountain had looked at the sealed container with his professional flat expression and his buzzing phone, and that she had filed as not yet, not here, not while we're moving. But that needed to be addressed before this was over, she said. Jack. He turned from the front seat. The people above Aldous, she said. The ones you said the documentation doesn't clearly reach. What about them? My father's notebook, she said. She had not opened it yet. She had the flash drive and the printed documents, and she had looked at the photograph and put it away. But she had not opened the notebook. She opened it now, in the moving car, with Nathan beside her, and the light coming through the window, and the road moving underneath them. Her father's handwriting was exactly as she remembered it, the small, precise, slightly left-leaning script of a man who had learned penmanship before it stopped being taught and who had never stopped caring about the legibility of what he put on paper. She turned the pages with the careful efficiency of someone who was looking for something specific and knew how to scan. She found it 14 pages in, a list of names, 8 of them, with dates, account numbers, and a single word beside each one, confirmed. She read the names, she recognized 3 of them, not from her father's professional life, not from the kitchen table conversations or the professional context of Vantage Pacific. She recognized 3 of them from the news, from the kind of news that appeared in national publications and discussed the movements of significant people in the orbits of finance and government and public trust. Jack, she said again. Her voice had changed. He looked at her. He saw her face. He said, "What did you find?" She read the 3 names aloud. The car was silent for long enough that she could hear the road under the tires. Nathan said very quietly, "He got above Aldous." "He got well above Aldous," she said. "These names, 2 of them, are connected to federal regulatory bodies. Not connected in the way of people who work for them. Connected in the way of people those bodies answer to." Jack said, "If that documentation is solid, it's confirmed," she said. "That's the word beside each name. Not alleged, not suspected, confirmed. My father does not use that word unless he has the documentation to back it." She looked at the flash drive. "It's all on here." Cole's voice came through the speaker from the other vehicle. "Royce vehicle number 2 is moving. Off the Sedona access road, turning north." Ryan said, "He's pivoting already." 15 minutes, Jack said. We underestimated. Ryan gave the car more. Emily closed the notebook and put it back in the container and sealed it again with hands that were not shaking. She thought about 15 minutes and 90 miles and a diner in a small town, and the particular mathematical cruelty of gaps that were almost but not quite sufficient. Nathan, she said. Yeah, the flash drive. If I give it to you right now, and you separate from us, and Royce's people catch up to this vehicle. No, Jack said. From the front seat immediately. I'm thinking out loud, she said. Think out loud about something else. We don't split the evidence and we don't split the group. The evidence is the priority. You are the priority, Jack said. And he said it in the voice that was not strategy and not management and not the careful calculation of someone delivering information at the right pace. He said it the way Nathan had said, we can handle ourselves simply, as a fact that did not require elaboration or defense. She held that for a moment. She said, okay. Cole again. Second vehicle is definitely north. It's not heading toward us yet. It's moving toward the 87 junction. He might know about the diner, Ryan said. He might know about Mineral Creek, Jack said. If he's been building a geographic profile of your father, he might know the general radius. Then we get there first, Emily said. And when we get there, we don't park out front. We come in from the east side of town and we go in the back. Ryan said. You know the town? I know how my father thinks, she said. He would have built the same contingency. He wouldn't go in the front entrance of any location if he was arriving while the situation was still active. He'd come in the back and he'd be watching the front from inside before he committed to staying. So if he's already there, Nathan said, he's going to see us arrive. Yes, she said. And if I go in alone first? No, Jack said again. Jack, Emily. He turned in his seat and looked at her directly, and she held the look and understood that this was not him managing her or protecting her from something she couldn't handle. This was something else. Your father asked me to keep you safe. That is a promise I intend to keep until the moment I can hand it back to him in person and tell him it's done. I'm not sending you into any building alone while Royce has vehicles on this road. That is not negotiable. She looked at him. She thought about what Nathan had told her on the mountain. Your job is the evidence, and how she had understood it then as operational clarity and understood it now as something more complete. These 4 men had been carrying a promise to her father for 3 years, through whatever difficulty that had required. And the carrying of it had not been abstract or strategic. It had been personal. It had been the kind of personal that you carried in your body rather than your mind. Fine, she said. Ryan and I go in from the east. You and Nathan cover the south approach. Cole stays mobile. A brief pause from the front seat. Then, Jack said, that works. They were 12 miles from Mineral Creek when Cole's voice came through with a tone that had changed, not alarmed, but compressed, the tone of someone delivering information that required immediate processing. There's a vehicle parked on the east side of Mineral Creek already. I've got it on the town camera. There's only one camera at the gas station, and it covers about 30 feet of the main street, but it catches the east approach parking. Royce? Ryan said. No, Cole said. Older model truck. Arizona plates. It's been there for at least 2 hours, based on the timestamp loop I pulled. Emily's hands tightened on the container. Can you get the plate? Jack said. Cole read it. Emily did not recognize the plate number, but she recognized the truck not from a plate, not from a database, from memory. From a specific afternoon when she was 14 years old and her father had pulled into their driveway in a truck he had bought from a private seller, and she had looked at it and said, Dad, that truck is older than I am, and he had said, that's exactly why I bought it. People look past old things. She said, that's his truck. Nobody in the car said anything. He's there, she said. He's already there. Ryan looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was not crying. She was looking at the road ahead with an expression that was not what he had expected. It was not relief or collapse or any of the things he might have anticipated from someone who had just been told that a parent they had believed lost was 30 seconds up the road. It was something more contained and more serious than any of those things. It was the expression of a person who had been running a very long race and had just seen the finish line and was not slowing down. "Cole," she said, "the Royce vehicle moving north, where is it now?" 7 miles south of Mineral Creek," Cole said immediately, "moving at highway speed. So we have maybe 6 minutes before it reaches the town limits." "Generous," Cole said. "Maybe 5. Ryan was already accelerating. They came into Mineral Creek from the east as planned, and the diner was on the main street 2 blocks from the church and across from a hardware store that had a hand-painted sign that looked like it had not been repainted since the 1980s. It was the kind of small town that time had not so much forgotten as simply not prioritized, and it wore that quality without apology. Jack and Nathan moved south. Ryan and Emily went in the east side entrance of the diner through a door that opened into a narrow passage beside the kitchen. And Emily did not hesitate. She moved through the passage and pushed through the interior door and entered the diner's main room. It was not large. 8 booths along the window, 4 tables in the middle, a counter with stools. Tuesday morning, mid-November, Mineral Creek, Arizona. There were 4 customers. A man at the counter with his back to the room. An elderly couple by the window on the far side. A woman with a child near the entrance. The man at the counter turned at the sound of the door. He had aged. 3 years had done what 3 years of living under significant pressure did to a person. His hair was more gray than she remembered. His face was more angular. He was carrying his body with the particular economy of someone who had been conserving resources for an extended period. He looked like her father, the way a sketch looked like a finished portrait. The essential structure was there. The fundamental truth of him was there. But some of the material had been redistributed. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "Emily." And his voice was exactly the same, not changed at all. The same voice that had said, "If everything goes wrong, come here." The same voice that had said, "You are the most capable person I know," to a man named Jack on an evening that she had not been present for, but that had been about her. She crossed the diner in 8 steps. She did not have the words for the next 30 seconds, and she did not need them. She was not a person who performed emotion. Her father was not a person who performed emotion. And what happened in those 30 seconds was between them and not for the room. And Ryan, who was standing by the east side door, understood that and looked at the wall and gave them the only privacy the situation allowed. When she stepped back, she had the sealed container in her hands again. She had not let go of it, even during those 30 seconds. And Thomas Carter looked at it and then looked at his daughter, and something in his face resolved. "You found it," he said. "Obviously," she said. The ghost of something moved across his face that was probably the closest he was going to get to a smile right now. "The notebook," he said. "The 8 names, I saw them," she said. 3 of them are, I know what they are, he said. "I've known for 8 months. That's the piece I couldn't send in the letter. I didn't know if the channel was clean enough." "Is it solid?" she said. "All 8. It's solid," he said. "The flash drive has the primary documentation. The notebook has the indexing. Together, they're sufficient for federal prosecution at the level these names operate at." He paused. "If we get it to the right hands." "Jack knows someone," she said. "Someone outside the channel's Royce has compromised." Thomas Carter looked past her to Ryan, who was still giving them the wall. "Are those Jack's people?" "2 of them," she said. "Jack is outside with another one. Cole is mobile." She looked at her father. "They've been keeping track of me." A silence. "I know," he said. "I asked them to." "I know you did," she said. And there it was, the full weight of it. 3 years compressed into a diner counter on a Tuesday morning. The thing that needed to be said and was going to say now, because later was never guaranteed, and she had learned that lesson completely. "We're going to have a long conversation about that decision." "Yes," he said. "We are. But not right now." "No," he said, "not right now," Ryan said. From the door, with the particular quality of someone delivering information that required immediate action. "Cole says 4 minutes." Thomas Carter was already off the stool. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had been ready to move for some time and had only been waiting for the confirmation that the right person had arrived. He looked at the sealed container in Emily's hands and said, "We need to get that somewhere it can't be intercepted in transit." "Jack has a contact," Emily said. "Someone at the federal level who's outside Royce's network." "Name?" Thomas said. She looked at Ryan. Ryan said a name. Thomas Carter's expression shifted in a way that Emily couldn't fully read, not recognition exactly, but something adjacent to it. "That name came up in the documentation," he said carefully. "On the right side. Someone who was approached by Royce's people and declined." "Declined how?" Ryan said. "Formally, in writing. Which means there's a record of the approach and the refusal." Thomas looked at his daughter. "If that person has the documentation and a record of being approached and having refused, that's insulation. That's someone who has already established their independence from Royce's network in a verifiable way." "Then that's who we go to," Emily said. Cole's voice through Ryan's phone. 3 minutes. The vehicle is slowing. "I think they've spotted the truck." Thomas Carter said, "We need to go out the back." They moved. Ryan led, Thomas and Emily behind him, through the kitchen passage and out the east side door into the narrow space between the diner and the hardware store wall. Jack Nathan materialized from the south approach. She had not heard them arrive, and she did not ask how. And Jack looked at Thomas Carter, and Thomas Carter looked at Jack, and the two men held each other's gaze. For a long moment that carried 3 years inside it. Thomas said, "Jack." "Jack," said Tom. A pause. Thomas said, "She cut your zip ties." Jack said, "She did." Thomas looked at his daughter with an expression that was too complicated to be named and that she felt land somewhere in the center of her chest. "Of course she did," he said quietly. Cole's voice. "Urgent now. They're parking. 2 people out of the vehicle, moving toward the diner entrance." Jack said, "Tom, we need to move right now. I'll explain the full plan in the vehicle." Thomas said, "Which vehicle?" 2, Jack said. "Emily and Ryan take the documentation north in the first vehicle. The rest of us run interference with the second vehicle going south." Emily said, "I'm not Emily." Jack's voice, the voice that was not negotiable. She looked at him. "The evidence has to get north," he said. "You are the only person in this group who knows exactly what's in that container and exactly how it maps to the names in that notebook. If we get separated from you, you can still brief the contact and get the documentation to someone who can act on it. If we separate you from the container, it's just a flash drive and some paper. The 2 of you together are the case." He held her gaze. "Your father built this so that you were the necessary component. Trust that." She looked at her father. Thomas Carter looked at his daughter and said, "He's right." She breathed in, she breathed out. "Fine," she said, for the 3rd time in 24 hours. Except this time, it didn't feel like concession. It felt like a decision that was entirely hers. She looked at Ryan. "Drive fast." Ryan said, "That's what I do." Thomas was already moving to the second vehicle with Jack and Nathan. Cole pulled up in the second car, and Thomas got in the back, and Jack got in the front. And Nathan folded himself into the remaining space. And as Ryan pulled the first vehicle north, Cole's vehicle went south, drawing toward the diner, drawing attention the way a hand draws the eye, while the other hand does the actual work. Emily watched the second vehicle recede in the mirror and held the container in her lap and felt the road opening up in front of her. "Cole's contact," she said. Ryan said, "What about him? Can we reach him before we get there? I want to establish the approach before we arrive. I don't want to show up at a federal contact's locations with a sealed container of evidence of significant criminal conspiracy and no advance notice. That goes badly in movies, and it goes badly in real life." Ryan was already on the phone. Dialing with one hand, eyes on the road, it rang 3 times. A voice answered that Emily couldn't make out. Ryan said, "This is Ryan Slade, Hells Angels, Arizona chapter. I need to speak to Deputy Inspector Carver. Tell him it's about Meridian Property Group and Warren Aldous." A pause. "Tell him we have the primary documentation and we have Thomas Carter." Another pause. Longer. Then Ryan said 15 minutes and hung up. Emily looked at him. "He was available," Ryan said. "He was waiting," Emily said. Ryan didn't respond to that, but the set of his shoulders told her she was right. Someone had been waiting for this call. Someone had been sitting at the end of a line that had been and extended toward this moment for longer than she had known the moment existed. The road north unrolled ahead of them, and a sealed container sat in her lap, and the notebook was inside it, with 8 confirmed names. And she thought about 247 families and a man who had spent 3 years building a case meticulous enough to hold. And she thought about a 4 a.m. highway and a man with bound wrists who had told her to leave. And she thought about a multi-tool that had cost $4 in a Flagstaff pawn shop. And she thought about the specific arithmetic of things that mattered, not the grand architecture of justice or accountability or any of the large words people use to describe moments like this one, but the small, specific, individual things. A woman who hadn't stopped when she could have kept walking. 4 men who had carried a promise for 3 years without letting it down. A father who had built his contingency plan around the one thing he was certain of, that his daughter would show up. She thought about all of it, and she held it, and she let herself feel its full weight for the first time since 4 a.m. because the road was clear ahead of them. And Ryan was driving, and the window her father had built was holding. And she had earned the right to feel it. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. 4 words, "I hear the coffee's good." She looked at the message for a long moment. She typed back, "Order me one. I'm almost there." She put the phone in her pocket and looked at the road ahead, and for the first time in 3 years, Emily Carter was not surviving. She was arriving. Deputy Inspector Ray Carver was not what Emily had expected. She had constructed a mental image during the drive north, a composite of every federal official she had ever encountered or read about, authoritative and formal, and operating behind the particular glass wall of institutional power that kept civilians at a manageable distance. What she found when Ryan pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript office building 40 miles north of Mineral Creek was a man in his late 50s in a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, standing outside the entrance with his arms crossed and the expression of someone who had been waiting and who had made his peace with the waiting, but who was very glad the waiting was over. He looked at the vehicle. He looked at Emily when she stepped out. He looked at the sealed container in her hands. He said, "You're Thomas Carter's daughter." "Yes," she said. "You look like him," he said, around the eyes. He extended his hand. "Ray Carver. And before you say anything, yes, I know. No relation to the writer. I've heard every possible version of that joke." She shook his hand. "Emily Carter. And I wasn't going to say anything about the writer." "Good." He looked at Ryan. "Ryan Slade. You sounded different on the phone than I expected." Ryan said, "People usually say that." Carver looked back at Emily and at the container, and his expression lost the light quality and became something more serious. "Come inside," he said. "We have a lot of ground to cover, and I'd prefer to cover it with walls around us." The office was spare and functional, the kind of space that was used for work rather than impression. Carver had a colleague there, a woman named Diane Chen, who said very little and took very precise notes, and the two of them sat across a table from Emily and Ryan and listened while Emily laid it out. Not all of it, not the personal parts, not the 4 a.m. highway or the letter or the diner in Mineral Creek or the text message that she was still carrying in her chest like something warm. The operational parts, the documentary chain, the names. When she put the flash drive on the table, Carver picked it up and looked at it with the careful attention of a man who understood what he was holding. When she read him the 8 names from the notebook, he wrote them down without blinking, which told her he recognized them, which told her her father had been right about their significance. When she got to the 3rd name, the one connected to the federal regulatory body, Carver set down his pen. "Carter had confirmation on this one?" he said. "The word in the notebook beside that name is confirmed," Emily said. "My father does not use that word without documentation to support it." Carver and Chen looked at each other. "If the documentation on the drive supports what you're describing," Carver said carefully, "then what your father built over the last 3 years is not just a case against Meridian Property Group. It is a case against a coordinated network of financial fraud and obstruction that reaches into federal infrastructure. He paused. That is a significant thing, Miss Carter. I know what it is, she said. I want to be clear about the process from here, he said. This goes to a specific Unit 1 that was specifically established to operate outside the standard chain of command for exactly this kind of situation. The people Royce has compromised do not have visibility into this unit's activities. That is not an accident. That is how it was designed. My father knew about this unit, Emily said. It was not a question. Carver met her eyes. Your father is the reason this unit exists, he said. The initial intelligence that justified its creation came from an anonymous source approximately 2.5 years ago. We've known for about 18 months who that source was. The room was quiet for a moment. Ryan said, from where he was sitting, with the flatness of someone confirming something he had half expected. He built you the tool to use the evidence before he had the evidence to give you. He was thorough, Carver said, and the word carried respect. Emily put her hands on the table and felt the full geography of what her father had done, not just the 3 years of careful documentation, not just the layered contingencies and the fail-safe locations and the controlled intelligence fed through Aldous. He had built the receiving structure too. He had seen far enough ahead to understand that the evidence alone was not sufficient without a safe place for it to land. And he had spent 2.5 years helping to construct that place before he had the evidence to put into it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jack. Tom is safe. Cole is with him. Royce's vehicle went south when we split. They followed the wrong car. We have time. She exhaled for what felt like the first time in several hours. She typed back, Carver has the drive. It's done. 3 seconds. Then tell Ryan he drives too fast. She looked at Ryan. Jack says you drive too fast. Ryan said, Jack has said that approximately 400 times. She put the phone down and looked at Carver. What happens now? Specifically, walk me through it. Carver leaned forward. The drive goes to our technical unit in the next 2 hours. They'll begin verification of the documentation, cross-referencing the financial records against the existing paper trail for Meridian and the associated holding companies. That process takes 48 to 72 hours for a preliminary assessment. He looked at her steadily. In the meantime, I'm going to need a sworn statement from you, covering the chain of custody for the documentation, how it was stored, how you retrieved it, who has had access since retrieval. That statement is the evidentiary foundation that makes the documentation usable. I can do that right now, Emily said. I was hoping you'd say that, Carver said. She gave the statement. It took 45 minutes, and she was precise, and she was complete, and she did not embellish or understate. She gave the statement the way her father managed accounts, with the understanding that accuracy was not a preference but a professional obligation, and that the details were where truth lived and where dishonesty always eventually surfaced. Diane Chen took it down verbatim, and Emily signed it and dated it, and when it was done, she sat back and felt the specific quality of a task completed to its correct standard. Carver said, There's something I want to tell you. Off the record, before you leave. She looked at him. We've been building toward this moment for a long time, he said. A lot of people have carried pieces of it, your father in the most significant way, but others too. Jack Malone and his people have been more useful than they probably know, because the kind of intelligence gathering we can't do inside official channels, they could do. The cooperation between those two worlds, the one your father inhabited and the one Jack inhabits, that cooperation is not something that happens easily. It required trust on both sides. He paused. I want you to know that what happened at 4 a.m. on Route 89 was not accidental. We know the people who attacked Jack that night were sent specifically to intercept the documents he was carrying, partial copies, not the complete set, but enough to tell Royce we were getting close. We know Royce's people had been tracking Jack for 2 weeks. What we didn't know. He stopped. Emily waited. What we didn't know was that you would be on that road, he said. That was not planned. That was not part of any operation. That was, he seemed to be choosing the word carefully. That was you. Just you. Just a person who didn't keep walking. She looked at the table. I'm telling you this, Carver said, because in my experience, people who do significant things in significant moments don't usually understand the significance while it's happening. They find out later. And finding out later can go two ways. It can make the moment feel smaller because it was unconscious, or it can make it feel larger because it was genuine. I think it's the second thing. I think the fact that you didn't plan to be on that road, the fact that you didn't stop because you knew what was at stake, I think that's actually what makes it matter. Emily Carter sat in a spare federal office building with a flannel-shirted deputy inspector who had spent 2.5 years building a structure around evidence that her father spent 3 years constructing, and she let herself receive what he was saying without deflecting it or minimizing it or filing it in the category of things she would think about later. She said, "My father is going to need protection while the case moves forward." "Already arranged," Carver said. And the people Royce threatened into silence, the witnesses in Nevada. Carver looked at her with something that was almost a smile. "One thing at a time, Miss Carter." "That's not a no," she said. "That's absolutely not a no," he said. She stood, she shook his hand, and then Diane Chen's hand, and he picked up her backpack, and she walked out of that office building with Ryan beside her, and the sealed container now logged into evidence, properly documented, signed and dated, and beyond the reach of anyone who wanted it, gone no longer in her hands. She stood in the parking lot and felt the absence of it. She had been carrying it since the rock formation on the mountain. She had carried it through the diner and through the drive north and through 45 minutes of sworn testimony. She had carried it the way she carried everything with her full body, not just her arms, the weight distributed into her spine and her shoulders and her legs. Made manageable, by the way, she had learned to carry things over 14 months of carrying everything she owned. Now it was gone, and her hands were empty, and she stood in the November air and breathed. Ryan stood beside her and said nothing, which was exactly right. Her phone rang. Her father's voice said, "It's done?" "It's done," she said. A silence on his end that carried more than silence. She could hear him breathing. She could hear, in the quality of that breath, 3 years of held tension beginning to release in the specific, careful way of something that had been held very tightly for very long and needed to be released slowly, or it would break something on the way out. He said, "Emily." She said, "I know, Dad. I'm sorry," he said. "I know it's not enough, and it's also sufficient," she said. "We'll figure out the difference later. Together." Another silence. "Then Cole is with me. Jack is on his way." "I'll be there in 2 hours," she said. "Don't go anywhere." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but lived next to one. "I've been waiting 3 years," he said. "I think I can manage 2 hours." She put the phone in her pocket and looked at Ryan. "We need to go back south, I know," he said. He was already moving toward the vehicle. What followed was not the end of anything. Emily understood that clearly as Ryan drove south and the miles went backward under them. The case would take months. The legal machinery that Carver's unit would set in motion was not fast machinery. It was deliberate and it was thorough, and it required the kind of patience that she had been building for 3 years without knowing she was building it. Royce would be arrested, but not today. The 8 names in the notebook would face consequences, but not this week. The 247 families would have their day, but it would require the slow grind of legal process, and that process would have setbacks and complications and moments where it looked like it might not hold. She knew all of this. She accepted all of this. Because the thing that mattered right now, the thing that was actually real and actually present and actually hers, was not the case. The case was started. The case was in the right hands. The case would move. What was hers was the 2 hours of road ahead of her and the destination at the end of it. They found Jack's vehicle parked outside a small roadside motel south of Prescott, the kind of place that rented by the week and asked minimal questions and had been hosting people in complicated situations since long before Emily was born. Cole was outside, leaning against the wall in the particular posture of a man who was performing casualness over the top of significant alertness. He straightened when he saw Ryan's vehicle. Emily got out. Cole looked at her. He said, "It's done?" "It's done," she said. He nodded once, the specific nod of someone receiving information that closes a loop that has been open for a long time. Room 4, he said. Jack's in there with your father. She walked to room 4 and knocked, and Jack opened the door and stepped aside without saying anything, which was the right thing to do. And Thomas Carter was sitting in a chair by the window, and he stood when she came in, and they stood in the small space of that room in the late afternoon light and looked at each other the way people looked at each other when looking was sufficient. And words were just going to be noise over the top of something that didn't need them. She sat down on the edge of the bed. He sat back down in the chair, and they talked. Not about the case, not about the documentation or Carver or the flash drive or Warren Aldis or the 8 confirmed names. Not yet. They talked about the 14 months which he had been watching from a distance and which she now walked him through, from the inside the places she had slept and the roads she had walked and the things she had learned about herself in the specific, unmerciful classroom of having nothing. He listened the way he had always listened, completely, without interjecting, storing everything. She watched him listen and felt herself become, incrementally, the person she had been before all of this began, except not exactly that person. A person built from the same materials but assembled differently, with a different understanding of which joints needed reinforcing and which load-bearing walls were actually weight-bearing. Jack appeared in the doorway once to tell them Cole had food from somewhere, and the 4 men arranged themselves in the small motel room with the particular ease of people who had spent enough time in each other's company under enough pressure that even a motel room felt like sufficient space. Thomas Carter looked at the 4 of them, at Jack, who had carried his promise for 3 years, at Ryan, who had driven a girl he didn't know south on a dangerous road without hesitation, at Cole, who had been pulling satellite imagery and tracing cell traffic and positioning vehicles at junctions, at Nathan, who had offered exits and told her her job was the evidence, and said, "You have us," with the matter-of-fact delivery of a man who meant it completely. Thomas said, "I don't know how to thank you." Jack said, "You already did. You built us a unit that can actually do something with the evidence you gathered. That's how you thanked us." Thomas looked at him. It's exactly enough," Jack said. "We're square, Tom." A pause, then Thomas looked at his daughter. "The multi-tool," he said. "Jack told me," she said. $4 at a pawn shop in Flagstaff. He said you didn't hesitate." "I almost kept walking," she said. "But you didn't." She held his gaze. "No," she said. "I didn't," he said very quietly. "That's my girl." 3 months later, Martin Royce was arrested at his home in Scottsdale at 6 in the morning by a team from Carver's unit, along with 7 other individuals across 4 states. The arrest was not announced publicly until the indictment was sealed, and by the time the public statement went out, the evidentiary package was so complete that Royce's attorneys spent approximately 48 hours reviewing it before advising him that cooperation was his only viable path. He cooperated. Warren Aldis was indicted 6 weeks after Royce. 2 of the 8 names in Thomas Carter's notebook followed within the month. The 6 were processed through a legal sequence that took 8 months and did not falter once, because the documentation was exactly what Thomas Carter had said it was sufficient, confirmed and built by a man who understood that the difference between evidence that holds and evidence that collapses is in the details, and who had spent 3 years making sure that every detail was right. The Nevada witnesses came forward when Royce's cooperation became public. Both of them. The one who had moved out of state flew back. The one who had stayed gave an interview that was carried nationally and contained, at its center, a single sentence that the people who covered the story kept returning to: "I just needed to know someone had actually gotten the documents. Once I knew that, I wasn't afraid anymore." Emily read that sentence and thought about a sealed container and a rock formation and her father's handwriting in a waterproof notebook. And she thought, someone got the documents. The restitution process for the 247 families took longer than the criminal cases. These things always did. But it started and it moved, and it did not stop. because the documentation that Thomas Carter had built over 3 years provided the evidentiary foundation for civil recovery that the family's attorneys used with the precise effectiveness of people who had been handed a very good tool and knew how to use it. By the end of the first year, 63 families had received settlements. By the end of the second, the number was 181. Emily knew this because she tracked it. She had built a system for tracking it, a simple one, maintained on a laptop that her father had bought her in the week after the motel in Prescott, when both of them were building the structure of a life that existed together again. She tracked it the way she had tracked everything during 14 months on the road, systematically, efficiently, with the specific kind of attention that came from understanding that numbers represented people and that people deserved to be counted. Her father came back, not to the life he had been living before that life was gone, and neither of them pretended otherwise. And neither of them mourned it, because the life on the other side of all of this was larger and more honest than the one that had preceded it. He testified in 3 separate proceedings. He sat across from federal investigators for a combined total of 47 hours and gave them everything he had in the same precise, unembellished way he had always communicated. And the prosecutors who worked with him described him in the language that prosecutors used when they were actually impressed, as the best prepared witness they had encountered in their combined careers. He and Emily found an apartment together in Flagstaff, which was her choice. She had lived in Flagstaff for 6 weeks during the 14 months, and it was the city that had felt most like a place where something could begin. It was 3 rooms, and it had a view of the mountains, and it had a kitchen table where they sat most mornings with coffee, and the specific quality of conversation that existed between 2 people who had learned to be honest with each other through necessity, and had discovered that honesty, once established, was the most comfortable way to live. They had the long conversation about his decision. They had it over the course of several weeks, in pieces, because some conversations were too large for a single sitting and needed to be processed in increments. She told him every part of the anger she had carried for 3 years. She did not soften it. He did not ask her to. He received it with the completeness of a man who understood that being received in anger was the cost of the decision he had made, and who had decided a long time ago that he would pay it. And when the anger was fully said, all of it, every specific articulation of it, she found that underneath it was something she had not expected to find intact. Trust. Not the naive trust of a child who had not yet learned that people could fail her. The earned trust of a person who had seen exactly what her father was made of, who had read his notebook and his documentation, and watched the structure he had built over years hold up under the precise pressure it had been designed to resist, and who had concluded, with the same care she applied to all conclusions now, that this was a man who could be trusted completely. That was not a small thing. She told him so. He said, "It's the most important thing anyone has ever said to me." She believed him. Jack came to Flagstaff twice in the first year. The first time was a check-in, practical, brief, the kind of visit that was ostensibly about logistics, but was actually about verifying that a situation stabilized in the way that you hoped it had, and that the people in it were actually okay rather than performing okay. He sat at the kitchen table with Emily and Thomas and drank coffee and talked about the case's progress, and looked at both of them with the careful attention of a man completing a task he had been carrying for a long time and assessing with professional thoroughness whether it was actually done. He decided it was done. The second visit was different. It was not about the case at all. Jack arrived on a Saturday in late spring, and Ryan was with him, and Cole and Nathan, and they stayed for most of the day. And the conversation ranged across things that had nothing to do with Meridian Property Group or Warren Aldous or any of the machinery that had occupied all of them for so long. Thomas told stories about Emily that she had not expected him to tell, and that embarrassed her in the specific comfortable way of things that are embarrassing because they are true. Ryan argued with Cole about something that she gathered was an ongoing argument of long standing. Nathan sat and listened to everything with the focused quality that she had come to associate with him, specifically the attention of a man who found people genuinely interesting and didn't feel the need to perform that interest. At some point in the afternoon, Jack found her in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms and said, "How are you actually doing?" She said, "Better than I expected. That's not the same as good." "No," she said, "but it's real. I'd rather have real than the version of good that's actually performance." He looked at her for a moment. "Your father said you were the most capable person he knew." "You've mentioned that. I'm mentioning it again because it's true and because I want you to hear it while things are stable and not while everything is on fire. It lands differently." He paused. "You cut me loose on a highway at 4 a.m. with a $4 multi-tool and no information and no reason to trust anyone. You said no to a man twice on the side of a mountain when saying no was genuinely dangerous. You walked into a federal office and gave sworn testimony for 45 minutes and you got every detail right. And you did all of that while carrying something I know cost you significantly." He met her eyes. "I want you to know that I know that, not as a case summary, as a person who was there." Emily Carter leaned against the opposite counter and looked at the man who had told her to leave at 4 a.m. on a deserted highway and had spent 3 months afterwards sending a letter on her father's behalf through careful channels and had put his body between her and the direction trouble was likely to come from on a mountain trail. She said, "You kept your promise." He said, "I did." She said, "My father's going to want to thank you properly at some point. He's been building to it for months. It's going to be a whole thing." Jack said, "I know. He's been sending me very formal text messages. He texts like he's filing a brief. He types every word out fully," Emily said. "He doesn't use abbreviations. He thinks abbreviations are a sign of cognitive decline." "I've noticed," Jack said, and something moved across his face that was definitely a smile this time, complete and unguarded. In the 6 months following Royce's arrest, the chapter received 4 separate formal acknowledgments from organizations representing families affected by Meridian's fraud operation. They were not asked for, and they were not expected. They came in the form of letters, mostly handwritten letters, from people who wanted to name specifically what had been done on their behalf and who had done it. Jack read each one and filed them in the same place he kept everything that mattered, and he did not mention them publicly. And the men in the chapter who knew about them did not mention them publicly either. What they did talk about, in the ordinary way of people who worked alongside each other and shared the texture of their daily lives, was the girl who had stopped on the highway. Not in a mythological way, not in the way of a story being burnished into legend. In the practical, affectionate, slightly exasperated way that people talked about someone who had walked into their lives unexpectedly and rearranged the furniture. Ryan said once to Cole, in the way of a man confirming a conclusion he had arrived at independently, she was always going to stop. You understand that, right? Whatever road she had been on, whatever night it was, she was always going to stop. Cole thought about it. Yeah, he said. I think that's right. You can't build a person who does that, Ryan said. It's not a skill. It's not a decision, what they are. Nathan, who was nearby and who had been listening in the way he always listened, said, without looking up from what he was doing, she would say it was a $4 multi-tool and 14 months of having nothing to lose. She would be wrong, Ryan said. I know, Nathan said, but let her say it. She earned the right to tell the story however she wants. The highway still ran through northern Arizona. Route 89, mile markers 47 through 52. The stretch that Emily had walked in both directions with a backpack that rode low on her shoulders and eyes that quartered the roadside systematically. It was the same highway. It had always been indifferent, functional, carrying people from one place to another without interest in where they were coming from or where they were going. But in the spring of the following year, Emily drove it, not drove. On a motorcycle, she had learned on a flat, empty stretch of desert outside Flagstaff, with Ryan standing 30 feet away, offering corrections at a volume that she could hear. But that did not feel like instruction so much as conversation. She had gone down twice before she had not gone down, and Ryan had not said anything either time that was not purely practical. And by the end of the third week, she was taking corners with the specific confidence of someone who had learned a physical skill by failing at it correctly. She drove Route 89 in late April, northbound, in the early morning when the air still carried the last of the cold. Jack rode to her left and Ryan to her right. Cole and Nathan were somewhere behind them. She couldn't see them, but she could hear them. The specific signature of their bikes distinguishable now in a way they hadn't been 6 months ago. The sound of it, all of them together, was the kind of sound that existed in your body rather than just your ears. She drove past mile marker 49. She did not slow down. She did not need to mark the spot or commemorate it or process it in any ritualized way. It was a stretch of highway. It was the place where she had made a decision. The decision had mattered enormously, and the place itself was just asphalt and scrub brush and the particular quality of Arizona sky at dawn. And she drove through it at highway speed, with her hands steady on the bars and her eyes forward and the cold air on her face. She thought about a man on the ground with his wrists bound, saying, "Leave." She thought about a $4 multi-tool. She thought about her father sitting at a kitchen table in Flagstaff on a Tuesday morning, reading the newspaper, drinking coffee from a mug that she had found at a thrift store for $1.25 because old habits were useful, and she had decided to keep the ones that served her. She thought about 247 families and 63 settlements and 181 and counting. She thought about a letter that started with "I'm sorry" and a text message that said, "I hear the coffee's good," and a man who had typed his daughter's name into a phone at 4 a.m. on a highway, wounded and bound and telling her to leave, knowing even then that she wouldn't. The road ahead was open. The sun was coming up over the mountains to the east, the specific color of early Arizona spring, burning away the cold the way it always did slowly, and then all at once. She opened up the throttle, and Emily Carter, who had once stopped at 4 a.m. to save a biker with nothing but a $4 tool and 14 months of nothing to lose, rode forward into the morning whole, unbroken, and entirely her own.